Nicole looked back at the divorce papers she'd signed, her hand trembling not from regret, but from a chill that was spreading through her body. She had waited too long for this moment, yet when it arrived, relief never came. In her mind, images of Ted and Leslie flashed like a wound that wouldn't close. She couldn't understand why she had allowed that man to betray her one more time, or why she had let a woman like Leslie step into their world and tear it apart. The first date with Carlton should have been a new beginning, but it only made her realize that freedom is not the same as peace. Carlton was considerate and calm, always trying to make her feel safe, but there was something in his eyes that frightened her. Not fear of him, fear of herself, because deep down, she knew she had never truly wanted to love anyone but Ted. On late nights, when everything fell silent, she still heard Ted's voice in her head, warm and low, sometimes arrogant, sometimes tender. She hated him, and yet she couldn't stop missing him. That, more than anything, made her despise herself. Ted's betrayal hadn't just shaken her faith in marriage. It made her doubt her own worth. Every time she looked at Carlton, she saw a mirror reflecting the things she tried to forget: her weakness, her longing to be loved, and the fear that she was only performing the role of a strong woman. She knew Carlton cared about her, but she also knew she was using him. In every smile she offered, in every glance that seemed gentle, there was a thin shell of deceit. Carlton wasn't love. He was a means to forget Ted, a way to prove to herself that she still had the power to choose. But the game stopped being harmless when Leslie started to interfere. The feeling of being watched crept into every moment of Nicole's day. She noticed strange signs: a black car parked near the house, long silent phone calls, and sometimes the distinct sensation of someone staring through the curtains. Leslie had always been the kind who never accepted defeat. For her, taking Ted wasn't about love, it was about power. She wanted to prove she could take anything from anyone: husband, honor, or pride. And by divorcing, Nicole had unwittingly created a gap for Leslie to step through and continue her cruel game. Meanwhile, Ted, the one who seemed quiet, was drowning in another storm. He couldn't deny his involvement with Leslie, but he also couldn't stand seeing Nicole with Carlton. He knew he was in the wrong, but instead of guilt, he felt threatened. He wasn't used to being the one left behind. In his mind, Nicole had no right to leave, and certainly no right to find another man. Ted's ego was badly wounded, and he began looking for ways to pull her back. Not out of love, but because he needed to win for Leslie. The spectator to all this falling apart, her delight only grew. She didn't need Ted's love. She needed the feeling of control. Seeing Nicole smile beside Carlton felt like an insult. In Leslie's distorted mind, Nicole was not allowed to be happy. She began staging little scenes, sending anonymous messages, leaving faint traces that made Carlton suspect Nicole still had feelings for Ted. Leslie knew how to plant doubt, how to make others self-destruct. With every lie, she pushed Nicole deeper into a spiral of suspicion and fear. Carlton began to sense something was wrong. He felt he was being watched, but he didn't tell Nicole. Partly to protect her, partly because he wanted to see who was trying to sabotage them. But that silence became a double-edged sword. Nicole felt isolated, no longer sure who was truly on her side. Every call from Ted, every strange text, every look from Carlton added to her confusion. She could no longer tell friend from foe. A voice kept echoing in her head. Was she being punished for daring to let go? Leslie seemed to be sinking deeper into her own deranged game. She began to truly stalk Carlton, showing up at the cafe he frequented, photographing him when he met Nicole, then sending those pictures to random addresses just to spread fear. She wanted Nicole to know she was still there, still watching, still able to destroy her at any time. Leslie's jealousy was no longer an emotion, it was a psychological dependency. She couldn't bear Nicole's existence as a symbol of something she could never become. A woman who was truly loved, The conflict reached a peak when Nicole discovered that Leslie had once used her personal information to sign papers related to the Dupree family charity fund. That wasn't just illegal. It was a brutal assault on her dignity. Nicole decided she could no longer stand still. She gathered evidence and investigated quietly, but the deeper she went, the more she discovered that Ted had known about it from the start. He kept silent because he feared that exposing it would reveal shady transfers he had previously made to Leslie. The truth pierced Nicole's heart like the final blade. She realized she'd been betrayed not only in love, but in trust. Ted hadn't just betrayed her with Leslie. He had betrayed their family. Carlton, who seemed like a safe harbor, could no longer make her feel secure while Leslie still lurked outside. The three of them, Nicole, Ted, and Leslie, were like shards of broken glass that cut each other until everyone bled. Nicole stood before the mirror and looked into her own eyes. Once proud, once believing in love, now hollow. She knew the war was no longer about Ted or Leslie. It was about herself, about whether she had the strength to reclaim control over her life or would let the past drag her under. While outside Leslie still laughed and Ted still tried to cover his guilt, Nicole understood she stood on a thin edge between vengeance and redemption. And once she chose a path, there would be no turning back. Leslie had never been someone who accepted being forgotten. When Ted began to pull away, when Nicole stood up and smiled beside another man, she felt as if someone had ripped the reins of her life from her hands. For Leslie, love was never about feeling. It was about power, about owning and dominating others through fear. Seeing Carlton and Nicole appear together at parties, smiling under Fairmont Crest's warm lights, felt like a public humiliation. Every gesture, every glance, every rumor about Nicole's new relationship was a knife slicing into her diseased pride. She started following them, at first out of curiosity, then gradually as an addiction. Leslie memorized Carlton's habits, the places he went, the people he met. She found out he liked a small cafe in the mornings, that he often stopped on the same corner before going home, that Nicole enjoyed walking alone at night to find her balance. In Leslie's hands, those small details became weapons. She began to appear in the places Carlton frequented, always at just enough distance so he couldn't be sure whether he'd really seen her or was imagining things. His doubt and Nicole's anxiety were all part of her plan. But she didn't stop there. Leslie knew fear alone wouldn't break someone like Nicole. She needed to plant a seed of suspicion. She sent Carlton blurry photos of herself and Ted together, hinting at a secret ongoing connection. She knew Carlton was the type who needed control, who needed to know the truth, and she exploited it. When he began to doubt whether Nicole had fully let go of the past, Leslie smiled. Because the only thing that ruins a relationship faster than betrayal is suspicion. Leslie burrowed deeper into her psychological war. She created anonymous accounts, spreading rumors that Nicole was using Carlton to get revenge on Ted, that she only wanted to make Ted jealous and then go back to him. Under the guise of an outsider, Leslie pushed everything into chaos. Nicole began to notice friends avoiding her. Those who once supported her now looked at her with pity. She tried to prove her innocence, but every move only convinced people she had something to hide. Meanwhile, Carlton, a man who once trusted reason, began to lose control. He became tangled in a web of doubt and quietly started watching Nicole, afraid she'd go back to Ted. He didn't know Leslie was orchestrating his every step, turning him into a puppet in her revenge play. One night, Leslie showed up where he was, uninvited, unannounced. She feigned fragility, said Nicole had threatened her, that she only wanted to warn him. Carlton, trying to remain calm, still wavered. Leslie saw that and used her body, her eyes, her voice to stir his emotions. She knew the line between curiosity and surrender is fragile, and if he crossed it, she would have the strongest weapon of all, proof to destroy Nicole. That night, Nothing happened between them, but Leslie had planted the seed she needed. She made sure others saw her leaving Carlton's house at dawn, and the rumors spread faster than she'd expected. Nicole heard it from an old friend, and in that instant, everything collapsed. She no longer knew who to trust, who was telling the truth, who was fabricating. She doubted Carlton, she doubted herself, and worse, she began to believe Leslie had one. Meanwhile, Leslie was drunk on power. She watched Nicole's reactions from afar, read every post, every cryptic line Nicole shared on social media, and each time she felt a cruel joy. But satisfaction didn't last. When Carlton began to keep his distance and Ted sought her out to settle old matters, Leslie realized the game was turning against her. Ted was no longer the man enthralled by her. He came only because he feared she would expose what he wanted buried. Truth began to weigh on Leslie, but she was too deep in her obsession to stop. She started thinking about a final plan, to destroy Nicole completely. She planned to fabricate a scandal, release doctored photos of Carlton and Nicole taking money from a shady contract Ted had once signed. Once that came out, Nicole would be seen as complicit in financial fraud, Carlton would lose credibility, and Ted, the man who once loved her, would have to side with Leslie to save himself. But Leslie didn't realize that by pushing everything to the limit, she was dragging herself to the edge as well. The more she tried to control others, the more she became her own victim. Every night she heard knocking in her head, echoes of the things she had done. She began to lose sleep, to doubt even herself. In panic, she wrote letters to Ted and Carlton but never sent them. The scribbled lines on paper were all fear, fear of being forgotten, fear of being exposed, fear that in the end Nicole would be the one still standing while she lost everything. The story was no longer about love or betrayal, but about a soul corrupted. Leslie no longer recognized who she was. She didn't know whether she was punishing Nicole or begging her for forgiveness. But the one thing she knew for certain was that she would never allow Nicole peace, because if Nicole were happy, the warped world Leslie had built would collapse. Carlton discovered the truth first through small details his rational mind couldn't ignore. Strange shoe prints pressed into the gravel at the entryway, a flash of a flashlight behind the fence when he came home late, a sliver of security camera footage capturing a shadow the night Nicole went walking. And when the last piece fell into place, he knew exactly who was behind these dark paths. The moment of realization didn't fill him with a performative fury. Instead, it brought a long, deep chill across his chest, because he understood what a public confrontation would mean. The whispers of Fairmont Crest society, the tabloids circling, and most importantly, fresh wounds for the woman he wanted to protect. Carlton thought quickly, guided by the instincts of someone accustomed to holding the advantage. He could expose Leslie right now, shout to the world who she was, destroy her with the truth and make her lose everything. But that would be a double-edged sword that cut straight into Nicole, dragging her honor and life back into the spotlight of gossip, making everyone see her as a failed woman who chose wrong. Instead of giving in to the impulse for revenge, he decided to conceal his discovery like a soldier guarding the rear. He began to act quietly and deliberately, collecting evidence Leslie would never anticipate. Copies of call logs, photos of her appearances near the house, receipts from the cafe where she had deliberately left traces, the anonymous messages she sent to Nicole's friends, all carefully stored on an encrypted drive. He didn't tell Nicole immediately, not out of disrespect, but to shield her from direct fire. He knew real power sometimes comes from holding silence until the decisive moment, when everything is set so that a single strike can destroy the enemy's schemes without harming the one you love. When Nicole sensed Carlton's strange silence, a silence containing both protection and secrets, she didn't feel safe. She felt like an object being handled by two hands cooking up plans. But the pain she'd endured no longer subdued her. It became fuel. Instead of screaming or pleading, she converted her anger into a cold focus. First, she did the small, systematic things. She adjusted roles in the Dupree family's charity so every payment left a transparent trail, demanded statements, called an old lawyer whose integrity she trusted, and began watching those who had been overly close to Ted and Leslie. She worked like someone restoring order to a collection of shards. Each document collected a brick in the wall she would raise to shield herself and trap her enemy. When Carlton quietly sent her recordings and photos proving Leslie was still entangled in shady dealings, including traces showing Leslie had used Nicole's information to sign off on certain charity disbursements. Nicole didn't respond theatrically. She absorbed them, weighed them, and turned them into strategy. Her revenge wouldn't be the cheap spectacle Leslie craved. She understood the most painful blow to someone who feeds on shredding others' reputations is to make their own dirty games turn back and devour them. She began to stage a counterplay. She let it slip, calculatedly, that she had documents proving Leslie's manipulation and shortfalls, but she didn't publish them yet. Instead, she seeded small bits of information into Leslie's social circle, making her allies hesitate. She let Leslie's confidants accidentally overhear talk of irregular expenditures. She allowed a few gossips at a party to glimpse misaddressed correspondence. Every move was plotted like a chessboard, and the goal wasn't merely to disgrace Leslie but to dismantle the trust network she relied on to manipulate. Friends, the elite set, those social ties used to mask every wrong. Their strategy had layers. Releasing the evidence at the exact moment, when Leslie was at her weakest, alongside a legal assault to close off the escape routes Leslie might use to spin the narrative, suits for forged signatures, filings with the Charity Commission, demands for an internal audit, all launched by reputable attorneys Nicole had carefully engaged under the cover of philanthropic work. Carlton would handle logistics. He knew which journalists could carry the story to their advantage, who could be persuaded by irrefutable truth, who would retreat in fear. Nicole would appear as the wronged yet resolute party. No sobbing on television, no pleas. She would present a cool, focused image, the woman pushed to her limits who now refused to let anyone else script her fate. They used psychological warfare as well. Nicole knew shame is a powerful weapon. She would tease out a small piece of evidence that made Leslie think she'd won. A meticulously edited photo implying Leslie had approached Carlton in a way suggesting an affair. Leslie would rush to boast, to gloat, and at that very moment, when her ego was most inflated, Nicole would release the full dossier of financial misconduct and fabricated proofs Leslie had engineered to smear her. The clash between Leslie's swollen pride and the misery of being stripped bare would create a public detonation no one in Fairmont Crest could ignore. Yet while planning their strike, both Nicole and Carlton saw a paradox. Vengeance can destroy not only the enemy but also cast shadows over the innocent. Nicole thought of children playing in gardens, the elders at the charity, the remnants of a marriage, and that made her consider her limits. Anger could be honed into a tool, but left unchecked, it would corrode her soul. So the plan was built with two boundaries. One legal and public, to cut Leslie down in society's eyes. The other a moral line Nicole imposed on herself so she wouldn't become what she despised on the other side. Leslie grew increasingly frantic as allies withdrew. She counterattacked with filth, false accusations, smear campaigns, attempts to rake through Nicole's past. But each strike only exposed her more. While the world waited for the final turn, Nicole stood still, her hand on a blade long sharpened, with a rage transformed into strategy. Not a mad retaliation, but the erasure of the power of the one who exploited her trust. When the day of exposure came, she wasn't just seeking to reclaim her honor. She wanted Leslie to understand that some things cannot be bought by clever games of power and possession. That people, even when crushed, can rise and forge their pain into a weapon to free themselves. And when the last curtain rose, no one could predict whether good or ill would prevail, only that Fairmont Crest would never be the same again.